up, my wizards? It's Dev from SBMTG down there, YouTube.com, and today the Anaconda wants some. That's right, it's finally time for Green-Black Constrictor. I guess I should say the return of Green-Black Constrictor. A lot of you probably remember this deck had a real spot in the meta before Cat Combo came around and just blew the world up. But now that Cat Combo's gone again, a lot of people are wondering if Green-Black Constrictor can return to glory. And since it's like the day the Pro Tour starts, I figured it'd be a good time to cover this deck. And so today I'm going to show you exactly what I would sleeve up if I was forced to play Green-Black Constrictor at the Pro Tour this weekend. And it all starts, of course, with 4 copies of Constrictor himself. Well, the Sneck is obviously the centerpiece of the deck. There's 22 different things that work with this guy pretty well. Whenever you get energy, you get extra energy. Whenever a creature gets +1/+1 counter, hey, look at that. It gets extra +1/+1 counter. That's not bad, you know, especially when the entire deck is built around maximizing the value of this guy. But the beauty of the deck is that all of the things that Winding Constrictor makes better are already good on their own. You know, if you don't ever draw a Constrictor, you're still drawing a bunch of super powerful threats, regardless of whether or not you ever get the snake. So, like, Winding Constrictor wouldn't even be good if it didn't have such an amazing supporting cast around it. So, you already know we're going to play 4 snakes. Let's get into all the other stuff we're going to play. Now, there may be multiple ways to build this deck, but there's a basic shell of cards that pretty much everyone agrees on. So let me show you those right here, right quick. We're playing 4 copies of Walking Ballista, 3 copies of Rishkar, Peema, Renegade, and 4 copies of Verdurous Gearhulk. Now, these are exactly the kind of cards I'm talking about when I say that we get to play cards that are good without Constrictor. We never draw a Constrictor all game, it's totally fine. These cards are awesome, but if we do get a Constrictor, especially on turn 2, we've just made all of these cards way better. Walking Ballista is already a scourge. A lot of decks play a 3 or 4 of Ballista, but in this deck, we get an extra counter on a Ballista. Hey, you know, just pump 2 mana into it, you get a 2/2 Ballista. That's actually way better. And if you pump, 4 mana into it, you get a 3/3. That's fantastic. You know, Walking Ballista is already one of the best cards in the format. Snake makes it way better. You know, so we got to play all 4 copies of that. That is a no-brainer. As far as the Rishkars go, obviously Rishkar is good with all of these cards. You know, it's good with Ballista. It can put counters on that. Decent with Verdurous Gearhulk because, you know, any creatures with a +1/+1 counter on it can now tap for mana. Because that's what Rishkar says. So it's just Rishkar works with all of these cards. And obviously Gearhulk is like the biggest, baddest dude in the deck. And he's awesome with Constrictor. He can end up putting, 8 +1/+1 counters on 4 different guys if you have a Constrictor out. That's sweet. And he's really good with, I've already mentioned Rishkar. Total awesome synergy there. But also Walking Ballista. You know, you can just put all 4 of those counters on a Ballista and just like blow something away. Or just convert it to, dome damage. Send it straight to the face. So along with Constrictor, these 3 cards form the basic core of the deck, and we're going to play 4 ofs, nearly all of them. Rishkar is just a 3 of because he's a legend. In some decks, you'll see a 4 of Rishkar. That's how important it is to get these cards on curve. So those are the cards you absolutely have to play, more or less, but where you go from there depends on who you talk to. It differs from person to person. Some people want to play a mid-rangey Delirium build of this deck, but we've landed on the more energy-based version of this deck. Only plays a few energy cards in the main deck and a couple more on the side, but I feel like at least a few energy synergies are worth playing because Winding Constrictor makes them better. And just like some of the other stuff we're playing, they're good even without Constrictor. So to that end, we'll start with 4 copies of Longtusk Cub. A Longtusk Cub can get relatively big pretty fast, faster than you might imagine. A lot of people have been playing with Cub, though, in the green-black decks and also in the red-green decks for a while now. So a lot of people have awakened to how good Cub is. He always looks like a filler card, but this guy can be a 4-power dude, like, before you know it. In just a couple of turns, he can be 4 or 5 power. He's a great outlet for our energy. We can put a bunch of energy of counters on him all in one turn, We got a Constrictor out, then every couple energy we spend is 2 +1/+1 counters. So this guy gets huge fast, and he's a fairly low investment to start with. So just a good aggressive 2-drop is Longtusk Cub, and I think it's worth playing the 4 of here. Now, nearly all of the creatures we're playing have some form of synergy with Winding Constrictor, save for 1, and that is the 4 copies of Scrapheap Scrounger that I feel like we absolutely have to play. Just in a deck with 26 creatures, we're definitely going to get a couple of activations off of Scrapheap Scrounger per game. You know, we can bring him back a couple of times, and that's all you need against decks that are really dedicated to their removal plans. You know, just drive them crazy by having to remove the same guy more than once. They hate having to do that. So Scrapheap Scrounger is just great against decks that don't have hardly any board presence and just want to remove your dudes, which is every control deck in the format right now. And control's looking pretty decent, so we want to have as many tools against that main deck as we possibly can. To that end, I'll finish off the creatures with 3 copies of Tireless Tracker here. Now obviously Tracker gets a little bit better with Winding Constrictor, but is always good no matter what, and is especially good if you can resolve it against control. This will help you not only win the card advantage race. If you can just get a clue or 2 off of it, you're doing pretty well. But it's also a sizable threat. Again, you pop a clue or 2 off of it, suddenly you got a 5-power guy that control has to answer, or they're going to lose the game. And sure, control decks and other decks will have answers to this. You know, control's not the only thing that plays removal, obviously. So there will be decks that have answers to this, but the best thing about it is that it can leave behind some value. You know, if you just get 1 or 2 clues off of it, that value left behind is worth having spent the 3 mana on it, especially considering you got a removal spell out of your opponent's hand on top of all that. And let's not forget, best thing about the card, if left unchecked, if not removed, if they can't find an answer for it, the thing gets freaking huge. You know, it's not uncommon to have a 6 or 7 power tracker some games, and in those cases, you've drawn a bunch of cards too. So, just Tireless Tracker is everything against some decks, and we definitely have to play at least a couple of copies, but considering control may have a little bit more of a presence, I'll go up to 3. We're playing 12 spells in this deck, and half of them are removal. And I feel like removal is pretty important in this format right now, especially Fatal Push, which we'll play all 4 copies of in the main deck. Now, Fatal Push takes out Heart of Kirin, which is public enemy number 1 right now, obviously, but it also takes out, like, other snakes, so we have to watch out for that, too. But it takes out other snakes, takes out anything else at 2 and under on the curve without having to revolt it, which is surprisingly important right now. There's a lot of great 1 and 2 drops, and there's, like, a mono-white aggro deck. It's really a red-white aggro deck that's predominantly white, that is looking to make a splash in the next couple of weeks. You know, it's already top 8 at a few events. So this, you know, it's obviously incredibly good against that deck. There's just a lot of decks that Fatal Push is very effective in slowing their start against right now. And on turn 3, we can play any of our multitude of 2-drops and still have room for a Fatal Push, which is very important. Now, our other removal spell is slightly controversial maybe, but I'm going to play 2 copies of Never to Return in the main deck. Now, I've saved the Grasp of Darkness for the sideboard. They are there, they're in the 75, but I feel like right now I really like Never to Return in main decks because Mardu is no longer an aggro deck per se. It was never quite aggro, it was always sort of a mid-range strategy that just kill you really fast, you know, and it's still that. It can still kill you relatively fast, you know, you gotta be able to survive past turn 5 against Mardu. We still have that problem, but it's now a more mid-rangey deck, even more so than it was. It plays a lot more Planeswalkers main deck. It's really grown up, shall we say. So a card like Never to Return is amazing main deck against a deck that is more or less main boarded as Gideons and Chandras, and sometimes even Nahiris at this point. You see Liliana's in that deck. Very Planeswalker focused deck, so I want a card in our main deck that can deal with Planeswalkers, because they are a real thing right now. Add to that this can take out big dudes that something like Grasp wouldn't be able to take out, you know. Importantly, it can take out Torrential Gearhulk, you know. And of course you have to resolve it, but it's just as resolvable as all the other answers to Torrential Gearhulk, you know, and Licensed Disintegration, which is something some decks are playing. Some green-black decks are adding red for unlicensed. Or even Murder, which you'll occasionally see, you know. I think that Never is at least a better answer than Murder. Not sure about unlicensed, but at least it's a better answer than Murder and Grasp, obviously, for Torrential Gearhulk, which is an important thing to consider in this meta. Now, there's a 2-of Blossoming Defense in the deck, and this is actually the newest addition to the deck. I've tried a lot in this 2-of slot here, and Bristling Hydra was there for a long time, but it's really hard to resolve against Control, which is the deck that it's best against. You know, I figured we'd just go with Blossoming Defense, and instead of having a Hydra that we can protect whenever we want, as long as it's resolved, we'll just have a card that can protect any of our creatures, and only costs 1 mana. So fairly easy to resolve. So we can play it kind of early, you know. We can play it in response to removal. We can't do that with Bristling. We can't pay 4 mana for a creature in response to things. So I think that Blossoming Defense is a slightly better card in a format with so much removal. Obviously, we care about Control's removal, but even Mardu plays a butt ton of removal and all the best removal at that. And a lot of other decks play really good removal right now, so Blossoming Defense is a must because all of our creatures have this huge target painted on their backs. And we'll finish off the main deck with 4 copies of Attune with Aether here, which is always like an honorary land. You know what I mean? A lot of decks right now, at least almost any deck with green in the format, plays 4 copies of this card so it can lower its land count and have, more fixing and create energy, and we definitely need to do all that in this deck. Getting 3 energy once you have a Constrictor out is pretty sweet, but even just playing this on turn 1 obviously lets you go get whatever color of mana you need for turn 2, turn 3, and beyond, and helps you get to your 3rd and 4th land drops, which is also really important. So only costing the 1 mana and doing all of that stuff for us is super sweet. We'll definitely play all 4 copies of Attune. We'll play 22 lands in the deck, which is more than enough with Attune with Aether. I actually think we could probably go down a land, and there's some sideboard plans for the deck that do involve going down a land. Because I feel like it's pretty comfortable. We can lose a land relatively easily in this deck. We're essentially playing 26 lands, if you count the Attune with Aether. So we've got plenty of lands to make this happen. Here's our sideboard, and there's been a lot of work done on this board to make it right. Here's the Grasp of Darkness right there. We're going to play a 2 of that, mostly against Mardu and other aggro decks, obviously. Glint-Sleeve Siphoner will go in against Control, and I have seen this in the main deck of a lot of these green-black variants, especially the ones that are more focused on energy, but I really just like Glint-Sleeve when we know we'll be able to get it through if we play it early. And that's most likely against Control. Nissa is also pretty good against Control. Just a never-ending creature factory is always sweet, and I've also seen a lot of decks run this in the main, but I wanted to increase the number of Tireless Trackers and a couple of other things that I was playing. I wanted to make room for Blossoming Defense. Nissa was in the main at some point, but she's really only fantastic in the Control matchup from what I can tell so far, so we'll keep her on the board against that specifically. We're going to play 4 copies of Manglehorn. That is also against Mardu, but more importantly, a lot of the time, against Aetherworks Marvel, which is also a deck that's looking to make a comeback. So we want their Aetherworks to come into play tapped all day. So we're definitely going to play all 4 horns. 2 copies of Transgress the Mind, also mostly against Aetherworks Marvel. We want to get it the heck out of their hand in the early game if we possibly can, and any other big stuff that they might be holding on to. Gonti, Lord of Luxury, a lot of people are playing in boards right now against control decks and other mid-range strategies as well, so we'll play the 1 of, and then 1 Prowling Serpopard, also obviously against control. Here are your power rankings right here. Final score of 67, which is pretty high. That is the highest score that we've had in a long time because this deck, again, still gets to play a bunch of really, really premium cards and looks like a total synergy deck, Oh, you got to have Snake to make stuff work. No, you don't. The best thing about this deck, again, I'll repeat myself, is that all these cards are really good even without Constrictor, but they just go completely Gwen Stefani bananas if you do have a Constrictor. And the deck has relatively high marks in nearly everything. We're not quite resilient if we get blown out when we have a developed board. If we've got a Constrictor, maybe a Rishkar, maybe a Verdurous Gearhulk, we've probably done some damage up to that point. But if we get fumigated or something at that point, we have a relatively hard time recovering. And the price point is bad, but it's not awful, about $230 to $250 or so to build this on TCG Player, depending on the condition of the cards and what retailers you order them from. About the average price of $235, more or less, to build this deck. And if you added Liliana's, it would probably, last hopes, it would get a lot more expensive, but as it is, I think that this is a very solid build of this deck, especially if you're just taking it to F&M, There are some doubts whether or not Green-Black Constrictor will truly show up at the Pro Tour, and you'll get my thoughts on that tomorrow. Saturday morning, you should get a video that's all about my predictions for the Pro Tour weekend and all that, But I'll give you a mini prediction here. I'm not sure that Green-Black Constrictor, at least, will show up. But I still think this is a very, very good deck right now, especially at the local level. Last thing here, it's somewhat rotation proof. There's not really a whole lot in this deck that's going to rotate in the fall, so you got way more than 5.5 months to play this deck. That's all I got for now. I'm tapped out for this deck. Let me know down there in the comments how you felt about this one. Which builds do you prefer? There's this energy build. There's the Jund build, which I am really liking, honestly. The idea of just playing red just for unlicensed disintegration, I think is pretty good. So I think that deck looks really good right now too. And there's a Delirium build. There's just a mid-range value build that plays good stuff. Green-black good stuff, more or less. So there's a lot of ways to build this deck. Let me know how you build it in the comments section. Also, what are we doing next time? I've already told you that Saturday morning I should be putting up a video that's just my Pro Tour predictions, how I feel about this format right now, maybe a couple things that might shock the world over the weekend, who knows. And then Monday morning, you ought to be getting the top 8 from this Pro Tour. Just basically review some coverage of Pro Tour. So that'll be cool. You get to see the top 8 from that. I'll report on that on Monday morning. And then the next deck tech, I'll leave up to you. It's either going to be a deck I've been working on in a while and actually spoiled in the comments section of the last video. Red, White, Embalm. That's a pretty budget deck. Should only cost anywhere between $20 and $30. Depends on if I put in Angel of Sanctions or not. Anywhere between $20 and $30. Or possibly the mono white deck I've been working on too. This is basically big white. It's like a big red deck. Just basically plays stuff all the way up the curve, plays decent removal, still don't know what 5-drops I want to play because there's so many good white 5-drops. But I've got almost a deck or a week to finish off that deck because we've got to talk about Pro Tour for a while now here. So, you'll be getting that as soon as I can give it to you, probably Wednesday of next week. That's all we got for now. If you enjoyed the video, like the video. It helps me out an awful lot. It would also help me if you checked out our Patreon, patreon.com/SBMTG. You don't have to donate anything at all, but it would mean a lot if you did, or you can just keep watching. That also means a lot too. So if you enjoyed the video, do all the YouTube stuff, subscribe if you're new, make sure you hit the bell for the notifications. You'll get deck techs when they come out, and I will see you guys Saturday. Happy Pro Tour weekend.